This was the last photo ever taken on Chelsea McPherson's camera before she went missing. So just outside of Seattle in 2004, high school junior Chelsea McPherson's teachers noticed something was wrong with her. For one, it appeared like she just entirely stopped sleeping. She apparently mentioned to a friend that every time she fell asleep, she said that she saw the image of a clown that she referred to as Mr. Bubbles. Her English teacher also reported that she was constantly looking outside of the classroom window as if something was out there watching her. Police evidence gathered after her disappearance showed that her notebooks were full of sketches like this with what police now believe to be Mr. Bubbles. October 4th, 2004 was the last night anyone saw Chelsea. The last text sent from her phone was to her friend saying, "I'm tired of being afraid." And now...
This Aztec whistle is one of the scariest sounds you will ever hear. When odd skull-shaped grave items were found by archaeologists decades ago in an Aztec temple in Mexico, they were thought to be ornaments or toys and were cataloged and stored in warehouses. But years later, experts discovered that they were actually creepy death whistles that the Aztecs used in ceremonies, sacrifices, and in battle to strike fear within their enemies. And when these whistles were finally blown, they made piercing noises resembling the sound of a human howling in pain.
Creepy last words people said right before dying. Retired registered nurse Shirley Smith said that she had a rich patient who was a true Satanist. She had upside-down crosses and a satanic Bible at her bedside. The patient was dying of cancer, and Shirley will never forget what happened. It was the middle of the summer, and yet it was unbearably dark and cold in the patient's room, even in the middle of the day. There was such an evil vibe in the room that Shirley would call a priest to pray with her and her aides before they would even enter it. When the patient passed, she had not spoken in 24 hours, and then all of a sudden, she sat straight up and said, "Satan, take me." Then she fell back on the bed and died. After she died, the room got extremely bright and warm. Shirley said that when they moved the patient's body, they had to get rid of the mattress because the most horrible smell was coming from the mattress cover, and the part of the mattress where the patient was laying looked burnt.
Have you heard this scary radio transmission people have been hearing? So Mark Connolly was in Grand Rapids last week when he heard something strange come over his radio that interrupted the music he was listening to. He described it as a man's voice but really low and just humming a simple tune that Mark had never heard before. It lasted like 3 seconds, but Mark said his dogs were freaking out when it came on. So Mark does what anyone does and he goes to the internet where he finds a Reddit thread from 2010 of another woman saying that she heard the exact same thing he did. That was the only thread he could find on the entire internet of someone hearing exactly what Mark had heard, and no one had replied to her Reddit thread. He also noticed that she stopped posting 3 weeks after she reported hearing the noise, and she had been posting like a lot before that. But now when you look it up, like 4 people within the last week have heard this noise all throughout the Midwest. And still, no one knows what it is, but they all say that it comes over usually a car radio around 11:30 at night.
Blood-curdling facts that you wish you never knew. Part 16. Kangaroos are absolutely terrifying, and if you mess with one, it will likely lure you into the water and attempt to drown you. There's an abandoned Disney park that you aren't allowed to go to, and it was shut down in 1999 because it was infested with free-roaming alligators. The animals were being abused, and an 11-year-old boy died from a flesh-eating bacteria found in the park's waters. In the movie The Wizard of Oz, the lion's costume was made out of a real skinned lion. This is the John Lawson house. No one knows who lives there, but every single day, there are several female mannequins sitting on the front porch wearing a variety of clothing. Their positions and outfits change daily, and many believe this is meant to convey some sort of message. And in 1871, a train crash took place just 200 feet away from the home, killing 22 people. And these mannequins are always pointing toward the crash.
This woman was decapitated by her husband only 3 months after their wedding. Last week Wednesday, authorities were called to 21-year-old Jared and his wife Angie Diaz's home in Waller County, Texas. When police entered the home, they found Angie's deceased body and her decapitated head. Jared was also in the home and was arrested, and he immediately confessed to murdering his wife with a kitchen knife. The disturbing part about this was that surveillance footage was released where you see see Jared arriving to Chepe's meat market at 11:40 a.m. where Angie worked and stole a bottle of beer only minutes after murdering Angie. Jared and Angie recently got married on October 2022, but despite their happy social media presence, Angie's friends told investigators that their relationship was pretty toxic. Jared was controlling and jealous according to people that were close to Angie, but they never thought that he would go this far. Jared is currently behind bars at the Waller County Jail and his bond is set at $500,000.
This is Pennywise. It's an ancient evil cosmic entity which preys upon children every 27 years. Technically, Pennywise isn't the name of the entity, though it primarily chooses to take on the form of a dancing clown by that name. Its true name is allegedly Robert Bob Gray. However, the name It is also used by a group of kids in Derry, Maine, who call themselves the Losers Club. Shapeshifting is just one of its many abilities. It can manipulate reality, it can remain invisible to adults, and most frightening of all, it can manifest your deepest fears and make them become a reality. It originally came from the Macroverse, a void containing and surrounding the universe. It made its way to Earth when an asteroid hit, and lived under the land which Derry was built on. Its main prey used to be indigenous tribes until humans settled in Derry. It sleeps for 27 years and wakes up for roughly a year to feed on human fear. Its primary target is kids as they're easier to scare. Its true form is a massive orange lights known as deadlights. If you look at them directly, you'll either go insane or die. Casey Becker was brutally murdered by a masked assailant after receiving a cryptic phone call. The call revolved around the discussion of horror movies. The next day, Sydney Prescott received a similar phone call and was subsequently attacked by the same masked assailant. Sydney, however, managed to escape. Moments later, her boyfriend Billy arrived, but having dropped a cell phone, was suspected of making the call. He was then arrested. Sydney spent the night at her friend Tatum's house and received another call from the killer. Billy was released the following day, with suspicions now turned to Sydney's father, Neil. More murders took place at a party while Billy and Sydney enjoyed some alone time. Soon after, Billy was attacked by the killer and presumed dead. Sydney once again managed to escape. Later, Billy and Stu turned up to reveal that Billy had feigned his injuries and was in fact the killer, with Stu being his accomplice. They'd taken Sydney's father hostage and planned to pin the murders on him, something they'd done before when they killed Sydney's mum and blamed it on her lover Cotton. The audio lens was Stu having a TV dropped on his head and Billy being shot by Sydney.
You guys heard of the haunted house that requires you to sign a 40-page waiver? The McCamey Manor that's located in Somerville, Tennessee is described to be like a torture chamber. But before even stepping into this haunted house, you would need to complete a phone screen, a background check, and sign a 40-page waiver. And then if all that's approved, you'd have to watch a 2-hour video of every person who has attempted to complete the haunted house in the past 2 years. So what exactly makes this haunted house so scary? Well, not only can this experience last up to 10 hours of physical and mental torture, but it's been said that people are waterboarded, forced to eat nasty things, and duct taped. This waiver even states that participants must be okay with workers torturing them however they see fit. Some people claim that they were forced to take a pill that caused them to hallucinate. And apparently it's so bad that they had to seek professional help after they went through the experience. But Russ, who's a founder, says that participants are not being tortured. Rather, they're being put under hypnosis, making them believe that something scary is happening when in reality it's not. What's interesting about this challenge is that participants can win $20,000 if they can withstand the experience, but there has not been a winner so far. What's crazy is that people have petitioned to try and shut down this attraction because of how traumatic it is, but it's still operating till this day. Comment below if you'd participate in this haunted house.
You have to hear this. A former atheist says that he went to hell and came back. While on a business trip, Matthew Botsford was leaving a restaurant in Atlanta, Georgia, when 3 men pulled out guns and started shooting. Matthew was shot in the head and felt his body crumble onto the sidewalk. He said he flatlined and was instantly transported to hell. He found himself hung crucifixion style in a very deep abyss. He was in a cell in a massive cavern. There were chains on his wrists and shackles on his ankles. He then started to see pairs of eyes come at him from various directions. They were demonic entities, and he described them as having horns, club-like hands with talons, and gnashing-like teeth. Shockingly, these creatures knew all about Matthew and all the sins that he had ever committed. They tormented him. They would come around behind him and always to his right. He would then feel the very flesh being peeled and eaten off of his back. Lava would also flow in this cavern-like area, and before flowing down into the abyss, it would splash on his skin and burn and melt it off. Then his skin would regenerate and the process would repeat. He said that there was this continual mocking and sense of hopelessness and evil from all sides. Matthew's wife prayed to God to bring him back, and promised to stick with him no matter the outcome of his injuries. Then miraculously, after Matthew felt like he had been in hell for a day, a huge hand appeared from outside, accompanied by a white light. It grabbed Matthew and pulled him away. The shackles fell off and he heard a voice say, "It's not your time." He was then resuscitated and spent 27 days in a coma. After recovering, Matthew and his wife became Christians.
I had to hold my own severed head to stay alive. You cannot imagine the ordeal I endured. Stick around until the end to hear the full story. My name is Allison Bada, and I'm about to share with you the horrific events that forever changed my life. On a fateful night in South Africa, at the age of 27, I fell victim to a brutal assault. Two men approached me, me, and then attempted to take my life. They brutally stabbed me 30 times in the abdomen and 16 times in the neck. As I was fighting for my life, I held onto my head, trying to keep it attached to my body. The viciousness of the assault nearly severed my neck completely. With blood-soaked hands, I clung onto the remnants of my life as my insides threatened to spill from the multiple stab wounds in my abdomen. Words cannot express the intense pain and horror I felt in that moment. With the last of my strength, I wrote my attackers' names in the sand, ensuring evidence of their cruelty and that they would face justice. I managed to crawl to the road where I was eventually found and rescued. My resilience and determination enabled me to survive, despite my life-threatening injuries. My harrowing story inspired a movie named after me. Please leave a Dovey emoji and a heart in the comments to show your support. Like and follow if you enjoy this kind of content, and feel free to suggest any true crime stories you'd like to see on this account.
It was the 10th of February 2018 and a family was enjoying a birthday meal at a restaurant in Millis in Massachusetts. That was until a frantic man with a knife ran in shouting, "I want to kill everyone." Olivia Bergstrom was only 20 years old. She lived with her boyfriend, Benjamin Walsh, in Needham, Massachusetts. It was in the couple's apartment that they shared that he callously stabbed her to death on the day in question. After killing his girlfriend, he left her deceased in the apartment and headed to a restaurant. He knew his family were there enjoying a birthday meal. He had taken a knife with him and started shouting that he wanted to kill everyone as he ran in the restaurant. He launched at his mum with the knife and brutally attacked her. He also stabbed his dad as members of the public and the family tried to subdue him. Now, Jerry, the owner of the restaurant, was actually on his way home when all of this broke out. He got a frantic phone call from one of the employees about the stabbing. He said, "I turned back into the parking lot, ran in the front door to make sure the manager was on the phone calling the police. That's when I went into the room and saw the mum on the ground." Both he and his two parents were rushed to hospital. As you can see from the picture above, he sustained some injuries in the struggle. Luckily, his parents survived the brutal attack. After callously murdering his girlfriend and savagely attacking his parents in a restaurant full of horrified onlookers, Benjamin ultimately accepted a plea deal. He would plead guilty to second-degree murder and assault. He got life in prison, but as part of the plea deal, he can seek parole after 25 years. Although a motive for the murder has not been confirmed, family and friends disclosed that he'd been struggling with substance abuse.
Amora Carson was only 13 months old when she was the victim of an exorcism, tortured by her mother's boyfriend for 30 hours before finally succumbing to her injuries. Trigger warning with this one, her injuries are horrific and they are listed in the video. I'll also put another trigger warning just before I describe those injuries because honestly, they're not for the faint-hearted. Blaine Milam, 18, had a history of drug abuse. He was taken out of school in 4th grade and is said to have had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old. Blaine was also a sex offender after breaking into someone's house and finding a 13-year-old girl's bedroom. He went through her underwear drawer and then left clippings from adult magazines all over her bedroom, with notes stating what he wanted to do to the 13-year-old girl. He was sentenced to 180 days in jail, but served only a quarter of that, before moving to another country where nobody knew of his shameful reputation. In 2008, Blaine met Jessica Carson. He was attracted to her straight away. She was the same age as him, and she had a baby girl. Jessica was worried that the fact that she was a mother would put Blaine off, but it had quite the opposite effect, and on prom night he proposed to her, and she soon moved into his apartment with baby Amora. Fast forward to the end of 2008, and the couple had got involved with the dark arts. They'd both been using a Ouija board to try and contact their fathers who had passed away. According to Jessica, they'd spoken to the devil, who said that baby Amora was possessed by a demon. The devil had said that it was already too late for baby Amora, but if they wanted to save themselves, then the baby had to be sacrificed. Over the next few days, the couple tried to pawn some belongings to get enough money to get a priest to perform an exorcism on baby Amora. When this plan failed, they took matters into their own hands. On December 2nd, 2008, 911 received a call from Blaine to say that his daughter was dead. He said they'd left her in the house asleep and they were gone for a couple of hours looking at a property to move into. When they returned, they found Amora upstairs dead. The dispatcher urged the couple to perform CPR, but they said that they couldn't and that she was already gone. When authorities arrived at the scene, what they found was absolutely horrific. They went into one of the bedrooms and it was covered in blood. There was blood-soaked bedding, blood-soaked baby clothes, baby wipes covered in blood. Of course, this blood was baby Amora's. The details of Amora's injuries are so extensive that I'll have to go to a part 2. So please join me in part 2 and I'll put a trigger warning at the beginning because Amora's injuries are particularly hard to listen to. Disemboweled and almost beheaded, Alison Botha was on the brink of death. What the human body can endure is unbelievable, and Alison was determined to survive and bring her attackers to justice. It was December 18th, 1994 in South Africa, and 27-year-old Alison had just arrived home after a fun night out with friends. She'd pulled onto her driveway, and just as she was exiting her vehicle, a man with a knife ambushed her. He pushed her onto the passenger seat and locked them both inside the car. He then drove to pick up an accomplice, and the two men took Alison well out of the city to a deserted area. Alison was raped by both of the men, but that wasn't enough for them. They decided they wanted to kill her too. One of the men started to suffocate Alison, and as she lost consciousness, she says that at this point, she realised that her life was too valuable to let go of, and it gave her the courage to survive. She clung on to life, and the men took their brutality to the next level. They began stabbing Alison again and again in the abdomen. She suffered some absolutely horrific wounds to her abdomen, and the two men thought they'd killed her. They started to walk away, and Alison's leg twitched. This is when they realised she was still alive. They went back and started to stab her in the neck, 16 times in total. As the two men walked away, Alison heard one of them say, "There's no way anyone could survive that." They were wrong. Alison was still alive. Alison struggled to her feet somehow, and as she stood up, she felt her head roll backwards, and she realised she'd almost been decapitated. She felt her abdomen and realised the extent of her injuries. She had to stumble towards the road, holding her head up with one hand and holding her organs in with the other. As Alison's sight faded in and out, she saw headlights coming towards her. She was being rescued. Alison was rushed to hospital and taken straight into life-saving surgery. It's an absolute miracle she survived those injuries. She remembered everything that happened and the faces of her attackers, and after being shown police photos, she identified both of the men. The men were Franz Dutoit and Tions Kruger. They were on a violent spree and were known to police as the Ripper Rapists. The pair were swiftly arrested, and in 1995 they were both given life sentences. As of 2023, they are both still incarcerated in South Africa. Alison recovered from her physical injuries quite well, but her mental scars will always be with her. She has, however, drawn some positives from her attack, and she's spoken about her ordeal in over 35 countries, being one of the first women in South Africa to speak publicly about rape. She's inspired and helped countless survivors to come forward and tell their stories. A truly inspirational woman.
This is the unlikely reason that a trip to Taco Bell ended in murder. It was 2003 in Illinois. Sarah Kolb and Corey Gregory met after being enrolled in a GED program together. They quickly became inseparable as friends. However, Corey was known to have grown romantic feelings for Sarah, but unfortunately for Corey, Sarah was a lesbian and did not feel the same way about him. Sarah was known for being an alpha female in her friendship circle, and she started hanging out with a group called the Juggalos, who I found out are fans of the hip-hop group Insane Clown Posse. The group is stereotyped as being violent and crime committing, and in 2011, the FBI would go on to officially label them as a gang. In November 2004, a girl called Adrienne Reynolds moved to East Moline to live with her dad. She was enrolled in the same program as Sarah and Corey and quickly caught Sarah's eye. It's reported that Sarah made her feelings known for Adrienne and the pair began flirting. This went on for a matter of weeks, with the pair writing romantic letters to each other when they eventually decided to meet out of school. The pair ended up going to a party together, and it's believed that Sarah had expectations of how the relationship was going to develop, but it actually all ended up going horribly wrong. She was blindsided when Adrienne left the party and returned a few hours later. Adrienne told Sarah that she had slept with 2 guys. At this point, Sarah decided to cut things off with Adrienne, but Adrienne wanted the relationship to continue. She wasn't ready to go down without a fight. Over a period of 2 months, Adrienne relentlessly pursued Sarah for another chance. Sarah actually even ended up making threats to Adrienne if she didn't leave her alone. Now, Adrienne at this point decided to develop a relationship with Corey, and she started writing letters to him. Ultimately, Sarah ended up finding out about these letters to Corey, and she was enraged. On the 21st of January 2005, Sarah invited Adrienne for lunch. Adrienne was pleased, under the impression that they could all maybe finally get along. Unfortunately, she couldn't have been more wrong. After meeting up at Taco Bell, Sarah confronted Adrienne about writing the letters to Corey. A huge fight broke out in the car park of the restaurant. Corey ended up intervening, and he actually held Adrienne down while Sarah strangled her to death. The pair then took Adrienne's body to Sarah's grandparents' farm, where they tried to burn her with petrol. When that failed, they called a friend of theirs, 16-year-old Nathan, to come and help them. He used his granddad's handsaw to dismember her body and put her body parts in a bin bag. The trio then disposed of her remains at Black Hawk Historical Site in Rock Island. Adrienne's parents started to get really worried when she didn't turn up for work, and they reported her missing. Her remains were discovered by police on the 26th of January. Sarah and Corey were charged as adults with 2 counts of first-degree murder and concealment of homicide. Nathan was also charged with concealment of a homicide. Sarah was found guilty and was sentenced to 53 years in prison. Corey was sentenced to 45 years in prison after pleading guilty. Nathan was given a juvenile sentence of 5 years, and he actually died a few years after his release in a car accident.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there. I'm going to warn everybody right now, the case that we're about to cover is easily one of the most disturbing true crime stories I've ever heard in my life, so viewer discretion is really advised for this one. This is Kevin Davis. He was 18 years old back in 2014 when this horrific event took place. Kevin lived here in Corpus Christi, Texas, and shared an apartment with his mother, Kimberly, and his sister, Destiny. On May 26, 2014, Kevin snapped. He had been having homicidal thoughts for a long time, but on that particular day, he decided to bring his dreams and his fantasies into reality. On that morning, Kevin told his mother, Kimberly, that he wanted to unalive himself, and she told him that she couldn't stop him if he wanted to. After hearing this unexpected response from his mother, Kevin went into a rage. He grabbed a cord and attempted to strangle his mother on the couch where she was sitting. But his mom, Kimberly, managed to fight him off, and in a panic, Kevin went into the other room and grabbed a hammer. Now, this is where it gets really disturbing, so if you're still here with me and you have a weak stomach, don't keep listening. Kevin then bashed his own mother's skull in with the hammer, hitting her at least 20 times, and he then grabbed a knife from the kitchen and inserted the knife into the head wound. At that point, Kimberly's head was opened up, she had a massive head wound, and her brain was exposed, and Kevin stuck his hand into his own mother's head and played with her brains. He later told detectives that it felt like putty. Now, after his mother was dead, Kevin dragged her corpse into another room and her, which is unbelievably shocking and disgusting. After all this was said and done, he went to a neighbor's house, told them to call 911, told them that he had just murdered someone, and he was arrested without incident. When Kevin ultimately arrived at the police station, he was brutally honest with investigators about his crimes. I listened to the entire interrogation and I cannot unhear some of the things that he told investigators. It's vile and shocking. But at one point, he smiles at the investigators with a little grin and says, "Yes, I guess I lost my..." to a corpse. After his trial, he was handed down a sentence of life in prison. He's still alive, he's still in Texas right now, and he even admitted to investigators that if he was given the chance, if he were out on the street again, he would kill again. I'm sorry to have to fill your guys' minds with this stuff, but this is a truly disturbing case that I can't stop thinking about because of how horrific it is, and yeah, I cannot believe that this happened. This is Peter Scully, one of the worst pedophiles in world history. I'm about to tell you his story, but seriously guys, this one is incredibly disturbing. It's so dark, and viewer discretion is really advised for this video. So Peter Scully, he's still alive. He was from Australia, he had a family there, but he was engaging in criminal activities, and he eventually fled the country and moved to the Philippines. And this is where the darkness really began. While he was in Australia, Peter Scully started up an international child sex abuse ring. The things that were done to these kids are, I can't even talk about them here on TikTok, but he also started up a pay-per-view video service. And with these videos, he was producing CP, but one of the most extreme forms of CP that can possibly be produced. So how did all this happen? Well, when he was out living in the Philippines, Peter Scully had 2 Filipina girlfriends. They would go out to the streets, they would find kids that needed money or looked impoverished, they would bring them back to the house they shared with Peter, and the things that went on afterwards are literally unspeakable. Remember, like I mentioned before, Peter was the head of an international ring of people that enjoyed the abuse of kids, and he provided videos for these clients. But his most infamous video was titled Daisy's Destruction. This video that he produced was so extreme, so hardcore that people on the internet, when they heard about what happened in the video, literally thought that it was an urban legend, and they thought that there was no way this could be real. This is an actual screenshot of the beginning of the video. This is a screenshot from the very beginning of the video. In the video, 3 young girls are repeatedly tortured for hours and hours on end by Peter Scully and his 2 girlfriends from the Philippines. They are beaten, they are sexually abused. I can't even describe, like I said on TikTok, some of the things that happened in this video. And 18-month-old Daisy. Now keep in mind that all of this was on camera. That's the most disturbing part of this. One of Peter's victims actually ended up dying. They were buried in his house. And this sick individual literally sold that video footage across the world. And what's even more disturbing is that there were lots of people willing to pay to see that video. I'm not kidding. People were paying $10,000 to view this video. That is absolute insanity that there are people that sick out there in the world. And this is only the beginning of the crimes that this guy carried out. Some of the other stuff that we're going to touch on is absolutely disgusting. It's just horrific. And the story of how Peter Scully was eventually identified and arrested is extremely captivating. I'm going to run out of time here on this video, but if you want to see a part 2, let me know below. The story is far from over. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, did not act alone. This TikTok series is about to blow your mind, but there's a lot of information here, so proceed with caution. The case of John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer clown, is one of the most infamous true crime stories in American history. A brief overview of the case: in the 1970s, John Wayne Gacy murdered 33 young men. He buried them in the crawl space beneath his home and his yard, and he was connected to a number of different crimes. Gacy himself gained infamy because he dressed up as Pogo the Clown on the weekends and volunteered at hospitals and children's birthday parties. Now, the official story says that John Wayne Gacy acted completely alone. He had no help in carrying out any of these murders, but I really don't believe that that's the case. Through all of our research that we did for our podcast, we've determined that Gacy was connected to a number of other killers, pedophiles across America. And he even may have been connected to one of America's other most infamous serial killers, the Candyman out of Houston, Texas. So before we get into this, I want to state that I do believe that Gacy did murder some people, and I think he was very complicit in all of this, obviously, but I don't think that he acted alone. But why do I think that? So to start off, we need to talk about Jeffrey Rignall, this guy who was actually a survivor of John Wayne Gacy. After a night of abuse and essay at the hands of John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Rignall was allowed to go free. But what Jeffrey would go on to tell authorities and the media about what happened that night at Gacy's home is a major thing in this whole conspiracy. Now, Jeffrey would tell the police that while Gacy was essaying him, there was another man in the room. Now, whether or not this other man participated in the essaying or they were there to watch, it doesn't matter. Someone was watching this criminal act occur. He knew he could give a description of the guy, and he knew that someone else was there watching this happen. Then we get to Robert Bob Gilroy, who was a victim of John Wayne Gacy. So Robert Gilroy was abducted on September 15th, 1977. That's the official date that he went missing. He was supposed to show up for an event after that day, but he never showed. But John Wayne Gacy's plane tickets and records placed him as being out of the state at the time. His plane tickets from the time show that Gacy left Illinois on September 12th, and he didn't return until September 16th, the day after Robert Gilroy went missing. Already, these two facts point to a larger conspiracy at hand. There may have been people helping procure victims for Gacy, and he may have been even paying for these victims. And that's when we get to Philip Paskey and John David Norman, two of the most horrific people I've ever read about, and this is where the connections with the case start to get really shocking. And we've talked about John David Norman here on my TikTok before. This guy was connected with the higher-ups in the government. This guy had lots of political power, and he was a known pedophile. Remember, in earlier TikToks, I even told you about how John David Norman was arrested multiple times. He had Rolodexes full of index cards of the people who he was supplying these young men to. And both times, the police departments lost the Rolodexes and lost all the names of the abusers. But how did they connect to Gacy? Well, in part 2, we're going to talk about it.